So welcome to our November Talent Matters webcast. This month we're going to talk about EQ and the importance of getting a 360 view of EQ and how that all plays out in the workplace.
A couple of housekeeping items. As you probably know by now, this always lasts around 30 minutes, might stretch to 40. We will largely depend that on how many questions and answers we get at the end. So we will go as about in depth as we possibly can, and we're always up for conversation afterwards if you wish. Please put any questions you have in the chat, and we'll try to answer them at the end. And you will be sure to get any of the slides and the resources tomorrow.
Yeah, and this will take about 30 minutes or so. We'd like to keep it around that time. Makes it a little bit easier to fit into your day. Most people block off an hour, and we'd like to give some time back. I'm John Gabe. This is Cindy Gabe. She's our visionary. She makes things happen, and I'm our integrator. I make them work. Together, we offer different perspectives on our topics, and today we're going to dig deeper into EQ and the 360 approach to it. So, why is this important? The use of EQ in today's workplace is growing with all the different dynamics going on. EQ is becoming more and more important, and we wanted to share some of our insights on that. Give you some ideas what a really good EQ tool looks like. There are hundreds of them that are out there.
Mostly lousy.
Yeah, it took us a long time to find this one, and we just wanted to share a tool and give you an idea what some of the advantages of that tool are, and then give you an idea what the output, what the report should look like in an EQ tool, and how the respondent can use that to develop.
It's also important to understand when it comes to emotional intelligence, which was first really introduced in the 1970s and started gaining some momentum, things have changed a lot. We understood emotional intelligence was important. Right now, there's proof statistically that those leaders who employ some empathy in their leadership are getting higher productivity by far than those who avoid empathy. And so emotional intelligence isn't just about empathy. One of the things we love most about this model that we'll get into a little bit more is it's very practical and tactical and really focused on how it's playing out in the business. So we've seen this particular tool used in the U.S. Secret Service, in several areas of the military, and in state and federal law enforcement. So it's not just a warm, fuzzy, nice to have. It really is something that's needed no matter how difficult the job.
And in all the time that we spend working with leaders, the most important leadership practice we're finding leaders can develop is their emotional intelligence. There are certain specific leadership practices like one-on-ones and feedbacks and things like that that are important, but the overriding value that leaders can bring to their role is being better in their emotional intelligence.
And you're hearing more and more of the big business thought leaders talk about the fact that emotional intelligence is really now starting to even trump in, IQ, and that you need a little bit of the IQ to be able to figure out what the situation requires in order to be able to apply the EQ. So it's not like it's not needed at all, but one without the other really can become a very big problem.
Yeah, with AI, I think AI is sort of leveling the IQ playing
Right.
field a little bit. So it makes EQ the big differentiator. Mm-hmm. So we've got a presence in Detroit and Charlotte. We started the whole business in 1996 in Detroit. We expanded into Charlotte in 2008. We have clients all over the country, but we have offices in both areas. Our area of focus is in two areas primarily: accelerating the performance of organizations through leadership techniques, and then helping them get the right people in the organization through a robust selection process.
Pretty much all of our programs now come under the Leadership Academy. So if you see in the outer ring, everything really starts with the hiring process coach. How do we make sure we are helping our clients get the right people in the right seats? The next inner ring is, if you've hired that superstar, how do you hold them accountable to actually produce the things you hired them to do? And then as you look towards the inner circle of the little pieces of the pizza pie, you will see more traditional leadership programs like the Emotional Intelligence Journey that we're going to spend some more time talking about today, the Leadership Essentials Playbook that talks about the 8 leadership practices that will absolutely accelerate the performance of your direct reports, strategic leadership alignment that we talked about last month to make sure that the leadership practices you're employing are aligned to accomplish the things you have spent all that time, money, and effort putting into your strategic plan. And then we work a lot with visionaries, integrators, CEOs, COOs in trying to make sure that that duo is incredibly dynamic.
So we mentioned earlier the importance of EQ today is probably more important than it ever has been. I think AI, as I mentioned, is leveling out the playing field a little bit, which makes the emotional side of leadership something that is a differentiator that leaders need to develop and work on. We still haven't completely gotten past this whole COVID influence in the workplace. Are we working from home? Or are we not working from home? Is it virtual? What does virtual mean? Is it hybrid? How does that come into play? All of this is taxing our emotional understanding of what to do and of ourselves. We have issues today with new graduates finding jobs. Gen Z is having the most difficult time they've ever had in the workplace. And a lot of that could be AI, a lot of that can be the EQ. And there's no denying that Washington, D.C. is having a huge impact on the workplace. Doesn't matter where your viewpoint is, shutdown, no shutdown.
Tariffs, no tariffs,
it's just
war, no
creating
war,
all
right?
kinds of uncertainty, and it requires a lot of emotional understanding to deal with a lot of that uncertainty.
You know, I know we're all tired of hearing the COVID word, but one of the reasons this has become so important, when we drove everybody to work from home, people became more independent, more resistant to collaboration and interaction with others. And the reality was, if I only had to put up with somebody on a Zoom about this big of them for about an hour, I can put up with them that long. I can even multitask during that and then blow them off. It required a different level of interaction and emotional intelligence when I had to go to work next to somebody for 8 hours a day and find a way to get along with people, whether or not I really cared for them. But it isn't just Washington, D.C. Whether it's social media, the media, whatever's going on, everything is being positioned as us versus them. You need to pick a side. And that doesn't help anybody. We know it doesn't. So how do we find a way to allow space for people to have differences of opinion, to be considerate of those things, and still do what's best for the overall business and not just our own personal selfish motivations?
So on this AI front, in the importance of EQ for leaders there, we were just talking to a leader recently who was struggling with how forceful he should be in requiring his direct reports to use and embrace AI. And he's wrestling with, why don't some of these people adopt it faster than others? And he is struggling with whether or not to mandate or how to require some of these people to use it. And it is taxing his empathetic abilities to kind of weigh productivity of the organization with the feelings of his team and how to straddle requiring people to embrace and use AI more, which is different than other technological changes that we've had in the past, where we've had a greater period of time to bring in those technologies into the workplace, whereas AI is happening really fast, and leaders are struggling with how to require that of their team.
The other thing that came up this week, I was speaking to quite a few Vistage groups this week, and one of the conversations was a lot around the AI is really taking the place of a lot of the entry-level positions. And so now the people that we're hiring in the workplace are really more thought leaders. We're asking them, or knowledge workers, we're asking them to contribute their knowledge, to use their head, to use their thinking and reasoning that we're not necessarily going to AI for. And so the tactical approach that people got sucked into when they were working exclusively from home and just getting things done off their list doesn't really lend itself when business leaders are asking their employees to be more knowledge workers, contribute more, understand more. And you're going to see soon how this emotional intelligence program actually leans into better decision making even.
Now, there's different ways to measure one's emotional intelligence. And I would say 99% of the time, it's the respondent filling out a self reported questionnaire that gets fed into some algorithm and a report spit out. The key is it's self-reported, and it's sort of oxymoronic to measure somebody's emotional intelligence based on their self-awareness, which may or may not be emotionally developed.
Yeah, I think my emotional expression is awesome.
Very few people are going to be objective enough to measure themselves effectively in emotional intelligence.
And a large part of that is because there's a big difference between how we intend to behave and how we're perceived. So our intentions may be admirable, they may be honorable, but we accidentally do or say something that someone else takes out of context, and now our emotional expression is tainted as not being that great. So when we are self-reporting, we can't help ourselves but report on how we intended to behave. So it is a gift to find out how we are coming off to others so we can choose whether or not we want to change that perception. Doesn't mean you have to, whether it's good or bad. You might say, that's fine, that's how I want to be known. But at least you have the information. So in the event you say, oh my gosh, I had no idea that's what people thought, you can go ahead and fix that.
Yeah, so we encourage our clients to get 360 feedback on emotional intelligence from family members, which are completely different than anybody in the workplace. I would venture to say your emotional intelligence reporting from family members is probably vastly different than you're going to get from your boss or your direct
It's true,
report.
that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. So you want to get that perspective along with the people that you work with and understand how one's emotional intelligence is being perceived by the people around you, along with yourself too. So you want to have that data point that you can compare with all the different constituencies to gauge that that perception.
Yeah, it was interesting. We had one client who went through this. A couple of the folks went through it, and they said, "Oh, Eddie is this poster child for emotional intelligence. We all think he is amazing at this. He's the best." So he was going to be voluntold to take this. So he did, and we went through it together. And what was amazing to me is, yes, everybody in the workplace thought he was most amazing when it comes to his emotional intelligence. His family, not so much. And in further conversation, eventually we realized some of this was because he has children that spread across a couple of decades, and he's still trying to treat them all the same. And when he was providing direction, very clear, stern direction, when they were tweeners and early teens, that doesn't work. That delivery style doesn't work in their 20s. That he needed to approach it more like a coach, more like a mentor, a friend, rather than an authoritarian. And it was just a light bulb that went off that he needed to kind of modify his relationship with some of his older children.
Right. So it's not, again, it's rather uncommon to get 360 results on emotional intelligence, but that's really, if you're going to take it seriously, that's the way you got to get your feedback. Any kind of development needs to have a process and a plan in place. It isn't like you can take your emotional intelligence assessment, get the results back, read it, and suddenly improve upon it. We recommend a months-long process with some sort of coach or direction to take advantage of that valuable feedback that the respondent gets from all of their observers and put that into a developmental plan to grow. And it's a journey. You aren't just going to be able to change and improve emotional intelligence overnight. It does take a period of time, some self-awareness, some reflection on that, some feedback from others, some trial and error, and before one can actually make some improvements in their EQ.
Contrary to many of the other leadership development programs where you're learning techniques or you're being taught something, this is really more of a guided journey where it's a lot more self-reflection. The first month, it's always on self-discovery. And in that case, your coach is going to debrief you on a very comprehensive assessment survey. And I'll show you a little bit about why it becomes so overwhelming. And it's about 2 hours long. You really will feel like you're fed through a fire hose. The following month is really an interesting discussion because you have been absorbing everything that the coach went over with you in the first month, and there are some parts of it that will just come back and kind of haunt you. Those are the things you're going to decide you really want to work on. So you and your coach will then decide how to maybe go back to some of your observers based on those things you want to work on to get more clarity around what specifically did they observe. What were some opportunities you missed? So that in the third month, you can put together a pretty good development plan and some action steps with how you want to work on that. So month 4, 5, and 6, you and your coach are going to be looking for progress against that development plan, accessing other resources, exploring more conversations with some of your observers, because this is a very gradual but very committed journey in your development.
Yeah, and this is just our recommended process. Every organization has their own approach, but they all have some commonalities around, it should have some commonality around a month-long focus and then building upon it on further months.
Yeah, you can't just have a debrief and think you're going to automatically change.
No, it should be a part of a
That's not gonna
process.
be. Yeah, it's
Or don't bother.
Right,
You're just
right.
wasting the time of your observers. You're wasting your organization's investment. If you're not going to build it into an improvement process, at least 6 months, it probably isn't going to turn out the way you want.
and it's critical for the participant who's going through this to really be thirsty for information and committed to personal and professional growth. If they're just going through the motions, or you think it's a great idea for somebody else to go through it and they're not bought in, it's a waste of time, money, and effort, for sure.
Now, we were introduced to this model called the EQI 2.0. We like it because it touches on different aspects of emotional intelligence other than the 4 that were common that Goldman's work, actually it was 5 if you count motivation, but self-regulation, self-understanding, understanding others and communicating with others. This particular model looks at other different aspects of our emotional intelligence. Whether you use this model or not, the point here is look for something that is rather robust in the types of emotions being evaluated.
As I mentioned earlier, this is really a very practical and tactical approach to emotional intelligence. For me, it seemed to fit so well into the workplace. Many of the others, as John said, really focused on self-awareness, self-expression, awareness of others, and adapting to others. This one focuses on the self-awareness, the self-expression, and combines the awareness of others and adapting to others into the interpersonal skills that you see here. What I loved most about this model when I first found it in a book called The EQ Edge by Stein and Book is that it also looks at decision making and it looks at stress management. And in today's world, I can't help but believe those 2 components are more critical than ever. Now, on the decision making, the reason I think this is so phenomenally timely right now is how everybody kind of feels like they're walking on eggshells around everybody else. And you inadvertently say something that sets somebody off that you didn't really mean to, and then you get frustrated yourself. So if you notice, the 3 subscales here include problem solving, obviously in decision making, identifying the components of a situation that are a potential challenge, but includes reality testing and impulse control. So if John and I are in a conversation and he says something and I jump to a conclusion, I have a knee-jerk reaction to it, that may be completely out of context. If I take a step back, that's the impulse control, and think about what he said, and in reality testing, I put that in the context of everything else I know about John, is that really the right, maybe it requires another conversation, but it certainly could lead me to some very different problem solving and decision making if I can get better at that impulse control and reality testing that I think are so incredibly non-existent in many cases in today's world. And it also tells me that you can certainly understand why law enforcement or the military or Secret Service would certainly be employing that. Stress management too, if you look at the 3 there, are flexibility, stress tolerance, and optimism. It's very easy, and we've seen throughout this year of 2025, we've seen a lot since January of how people have allowed current events to really impact their optimism around their business, around themselves, and it's had a negative impact. So how do you, again, control the things you can control and not become overwhelmed by those other things? One of the reasons that the debrief in the self-discovery takes so long is we're not just looking at the 5 scales that you see on the outer ring and the 15 subscales, because for every one of the 5 there are 3 subscales, but we're looking at combinations. So as an example, let's pretend under decision making somebody has low impulse control. Let's pretend under self-expression, they also are very high in emotional expression. But then let's pretend under interpersonal, they're very low in empathy. Well, what do you think those emotional expressions look like? So you have to look at what the combinations are, and that's what the coach is really helping you understand. Not just each of them individually, but how they impact each other and the extent to which they really need to be balanced. So you can't just get better and better and better at emotional expression if you're not balancing out those other things.
Yeah, so this particular instrument does measure these 15 different emotional characteristics. Imagine how beneficial this is to get 360 feedback in all 15 of these categories. So for each of these 15 to understand how you yourself rated it, your family, your boss, your peers, your direct reports, that is invaluable information about your emotional intelligence. We'll go on to the next slide and get an idea of what it looks like. Here's I know it's a little bit difficult to read, but this isn't an example of a typical 360 report, which is going to break it down by the different areas that we're measuring. In this particular case, we've got 5 samples up here, but it shows the scores of self, your manager, your peers, your direct reports, your family. It gives you that cross section across each of the categories, and then a total score that again gives you something that you can work on and understand how you yourself and how everybody's views may differ.
Mm-hmm. The other thing is we know there's a middle of the road that's supposed to be pretty normal, and most of these scores that you're seeing there fall into that. Notice next to friends and family on the far right, there's also an other. And we'll see a lot of people who may belong to some networking groups or a forum group, entrepreneurs organization, Vistage, or you may serve on a board of directors with other board members, and you want to isolate those scores and get feedback from them because you may behave very differently in that setting than you do in the others. By having your self-score and then all of these other categories, it also gives you an opportunity to understand where you might have a blind spot, where there's a big gap between your perception and other people's perceptions.
Yeah, in this particular example, you see that the friends and family and the other categories are blank. They just weren't filled out in this particular sample. I would also observe in this particular example that there isn't a lot of variance in this particular section for this individual. That all the observer scores seem to be pretty grouped
clumped together. So the person's probably pretty consistent. But one of the things that jumped out at me is if you see in the second one here, the self-expression, in that particular case, the manager's score is a little bit of an outlier. It's pretty low. Well, self-expression. What are the odds this particular person is far more reserved in the presence of their manager, which may not be a problem, but it might be worth a conversation for the manager to say, hey, I recognize this. Are you hoping for me to be more emotionally engaged or emotionally open with you, or do you prefer that I keep it at a low key? So you get a feel for it. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does give you some intel.
So what do you do with the information once you get it? Again, having a nice report that sits on the shelf doesn't do any good. You've wasted the time of your observers and the investment of your organization. It needs to go into some sort of development program. This is an example of a worksheet that we recommend to break down the different components and allow the respondent to focus on those few that they want to develop. You're not going to be able to take all 15 and grow them at one time. We really want you to pick those that you're feeling most passionate about or that may have the biggest area of improvement, get them into a development plan, find resources specific to those areas and work on them before taking on others.
I think it's also important to understand you are given the option for choosing who your observers are. Unlike leadership 360s, where you really want to have all of your direct reports and all of your peers, you get to pick and choose which ones. You want to select those people who you know are wanting to help you in your journey as you improve your emotional intelligence. If there's someone who's kind of treated you like a jerk, you may not want to invite that person. On the other hand, you
Maybe
really may
want
want to, right? It all depends, but you might find out how much of an outlier that is. What's important when you're doing the development plan is that you get to choose what you want to work on. I'll give you an example. One of my brothers was phenomenally brilliant, IQ off the charts. Emotional intelligence, we never went through this assessment, but I can just tell you, not so much, especially his interpersonal skills. And at one point, the industry he was in kind of evaporated. He decided he was going to rebuild himself as a nurse. And I looked at him and I said, Michael, are you kidding me? You hate people. How the heck are you going to be a nurse? He goes, no, I'm going to be a surgical nurse. They're going to be sedated before I have to deal with them. So it was okay. He understood. He had no intention on working on his interpersonal skills. And so that was an okay thing for him. But he could have chosen, if he wanted to work on those things relative to his daughters, relative to his siblings. That would have been cool. But it does give you an opportunity to have some choice in that.
So we wanted to share one success story with one of our clients who had a couple of these high potential young whippersnappers they weren't quite sure what to do with, but realized that they had the raw skill set to be a good leader. And they thought what they would do to start their leadership journey is put them through some emotional intelligence training and get them some self-awareness that will allow them to become and evolve into a better leader. It was fascinating to see what happened with these high potentials and the confidence that they got from the results and hearing what some of the other people views of them were. One of the CEO was shocked at how that confidence manifest itself into owning the room when they had meetings, that this young high potential suddenly had the confidence to take control of a meeting and express themselves in that fashion. So it helps. The emotional intelligence can be benefit anybody, but high potentials I think can probably grow the most from understanding themselves.
And they don't have to be in a leadership role. So this can be done even before you put them in leadership, so they are much better prepared. Especially imagine if they've been an independent contributor and they've been peers to all these people. Imagine the emotional intelligence required to shift it to a leadership role. Now in this particular case for this Midwest company, and for I think we have some of them on this call, we made it a white robot, so to remain neutral. But the idea was, in this particular case, there was an engineer who may have been told all his life, you're not really good with people, you should go into engineering. So this poor kid always grew up thinking he wasn't really good at people. Now, I believe he probably put more effort into it than everybody else, but this is the head trash that he had heard. So when we got the results, most of his own scores were very low, and almost everybody else's always were higher. Was there still room for improvement in some areas? For sure. But when he first got the results, he's like, wow, everybody else thinks I'm not so bad. This is great. And that's why it usually takes 4 to 6 months before you really start seeing the impact of this. But when the CEO called, he said it was like a month later, that first small group meeting that this young man had to lead, he could see the difference in his poise and his confidence in leading that meeting that quickly, just because he now understood a different perception of how others saw him.
Yeah, you raised a good point about the value of the 360 for an introvert is they tend to get feedback and realize they're not quite as quiet or unassuming as they thought. Conversely, when an extrovert gets their feedback, they might be shocked at how some of the gregarious is getting perceived by the people around them.
Yeah, They don't necessarily realize that you can be like so cool, you come off as being flighty. But a lot of the introverts really don't understand how other people rely on their contributions, the fact that they are listening to everything that's going on and processing it and then offering up gems makes their contributions that much more valuable. Just because it isn't a huge volume of contribution doesn't mean that it isn't a great quality of contribution.
So one of the things we wanted to share with you all for being a part of this is go out and get a copy of the report. This will blow your mind. I think this is like a 47-page report on what the emotional intelligence feedback looks like and how it can be used for development. This is really what sold us on this instrument, is looking at how complete this report is. We'd love for you to be able to look at the sample as well, download it, share it. It will really give you an appreciation for the difference between a quality EQ instrument and something that you might get on the
That's
back of it.
self-reported.
Yeah.
And then if you get a chance, if you're that much more fascinated, the EQ Edge is a very quick read, is a great audio book, as well as, I think I got both. I first did the audio and then I bought it in print so I could go through highlighting and dog-earing pages and things like this. But I think it'll put things in perspective a little bit more. Emotional intelligence, the bottom line, is not fluffy, nice to have. It is absolutely critical as we continue to groom those people who are leading our organizations moving forward, and as we're raising healthy, significant contributors in our own families.
So go ahead and drop into your chat now any questions that you might have. We'll answer them when we cut off the recording here. I've got a couple of questions that came in earlier. We do have upcoming webcasts that we want to mention as well, but a couple of questions that I got are, is there a particular age somebody needs to be at before they can go through some sort of EQ assessment?
There isn't a specific age. I don't know that I would do this with somebody who's in high school or even college. They haven't really even figured out, the prefrontal cortex doesn't develop until they're 25 years old, at least 25 to 27. So I would kind of wait until we get at least to 26, 27 years old so that somebody's settled into the human they're more likely to be as an adult. But that's my personal preference. I think once they've gotten a real full-time job, that's a logical stop.
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on their emotional maturity, which can happen very, very young. It can happen very, very late. A lot of that self-awareness is important as well before they can objectively be able to answer about themselves and take serious some of the feedback that they get from others. Mm-hmm. So another question we have is, who gets to see these results and what, I mean, this is kind of like seeing somebody behind the mirror, right?
Right, yeah. So the results themselves are not shared with the organization. It's not shared with HR. It's not shared with the participant supervisor. It is shared with the coach and the direct report. It is kept pretty confidential. There's an exception. If in the coaching, the participant mentions something that could be harmful to themselves or others, we will raise a red flag or guide them to getting some help. That rarely comes up, but I have to put that qualifier in there. But it is important for people to understand it is kept confidential. This is part of your own personal development and needs to feel very safe.
And then one last question we have here is, so you take this 360 and you have got all these observers, family, bosses, peers, direct reports. How do you let them know what the results are? Or how do you let them know what their input looked like?
In some cases, well, in many cases, our coaches will record the self-discovery session because the person going through it, like I said, feels like they're fed through a fire hose and they may want to go revisit it. Some of them have other coaches outside the organization or feel completely open and may share that recording. That's rare. Most people are more likely to share their development plan. Okay, I got a lot of feedback. These are the 2 or 3 areas that I'm really going to focus on, and this is why. And it would be helpful if you gave me some feedback when you saw that. In fact, one of the other things when somebody signed up for the webcast that they put into the comments section is they're trying to be more aware of how they're interacting with their direct reports. And awareness is the first sign of recovery, right? So it's amazing. There are some things that it was pointed out to me with my personality type, I tend to start answering questions before the whole question is asked. And when it was pointed out to me, it took me a while to get used to. Like, I could catch myself interrupting somebody and then going, darn it, I interrupted them again. And it took a while to get to the point where I would just shut up and let them finish before I would answer. Maybe it's not 100% of the time, especially with John. But that awareness may come more slowly, but it has to start there. Right.
So if any other questions, drop them in the chat. Remember, we're going to be back next month, wrapping up the year, talking a little bit about what happened in 2025 from a leadership standpoint. What did we learn? How is that going to set us up for 2026? January, we're going to take some of that information, talk about the trends that we're expecting to see in 2026. We're going to hit succession planning in February, and then accountability in March.
Yep. If anybody else has any ideas that you'd like to share with us, or you'd like to see sometime in April or May, go ahead and drop those in the chat too.